Welcome back to Worth the Effort Woodworking and a kind of a new style of video that I'm experimenting with. So if you like this kind of content, please leave a comment down below and tell me so that maybe I can figure out more ways of doing this kind of stuff. Now today's video is basically going to talk a lot about continuing my education. Now, woodworking is not a hard craft to get into. It's not even a hard craft to master. The learning curve is extremely steep. It does not take a lot of effort or knowledge to learn how to put an edge on a tool. And you spend a few afternoons browsing some books and you can get a general understanding of how wood works, how those edges are going to interact with grain. I have a lot of videos out on that kind of subject matter. And you spend a few years, you can get really, really good, especially if you dive down in a specific niche. You don't know how many people I know that have gotten into the craft, really dived down deep, and become some of the best out there in just a few years. The learning curve, as I said, is extremely steep in the beginning. But after you've been in it for, 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years, you kind of start going through these little peaks and valleys where you get a small ramp up in what skills and knowledge you're gaining, and you'll plateau out for sometimes longer and longer pieces at a time. And what you find out is generally you have to start putting in a lot more effort in order to gain a little bit more knowledge and skill. Well, I'm kind of at that point where I want to start deep diving in little niches of information for no other reason than I want to be able to make more money. You see, I know quite a bit about wood, having worked with it, but I don't know a lot of depth about it. So in this video, I'm taking one of the species that I use most often, pecan. It is truly one of my favorites to work. A lot of times because it's free wood for me, because being in Central Texas, they are readily available. But also, it has some of the most unique characteristics in the end products I create. Some of the most beautiful bowls I have ever made have been in spalted pecan, because the color variations between the sapwood and the heartwood are quite extreme, but they're in a kind of a same hue. It's not like with walnut that's interspersed with purples and stuff like that. It's kind of the same color family that just works very well. And then you integrate controlled spalting from multiple species of funguses that interject different colors. And those colors will progress a little bit into the heartwood and change and stuff like that. You just get phenomenal results for kind of artistic centerpieces of bowls or wall art or that kind of stuff. Or even if you're doing flat work, the tops of boxes, or if you're doing a frame and panel, that center panel. Pecan is one of America's greatest woods. I understand how it works somewhat, but I don't have a lot of the niche information. And that's what this journey for me is going to be, that I'm going to be taking you along. I want to dive down deep into that tree and the information about it for no other reason than having that little nuggets of information might be able to let me write better product descriptions on my website, or if I'm working with a customer at an art market, be able to give them little nuggets of information to build the value of what I've created, so that to them it's not just a wooden bowl, but it is a pecan wooden bowl that has been treated, that has been raised, that has been developed, that has been crafted by me. I need that information in order to build value so I can make more money. So that's what this journey is for me. I don't know what kind of information I'm going to gather. That's the whole point. But I should be able to use nuggets of it for going into the future. Now, to start the story off right, I think we need to start at the beginning of my relationship with pecan. And that happens in Abilene, Texas. So let's hit the road. We're now at my grandparents' place, one they built in the early 60s. I grew up here before elementary school. When we came back from Japan, I think as a year or two we stayed here. But what I mostly remember is summers, because every summer me and all my cousins on the same 2 weeks we would all come out here and visit the grandparents. What's kind of cool is a lot of the other grandparents along the street did the same thing on the same weeks. It's almost like coordinated to give all their daughters and sons and stuff like that a weekend off from their kids. And we all just kind of played around for 2 weeks on this street. That's just how things are. Sun comes up, you go outside, sun comes down, you come back in. And one of the key things about this particular house is that central pecan tree. They planted that pecan tree right in the center of where their courtyard is. So in the front living room, when you looked out, you got to see the big, huge thing. And that's kind of something core to a lot of Texans, especially from that era, the mid-60s, early 70s and stuff like that, is the pecan tree was a central focus of it. And that particular one right there, my grandfather used to really prize the fruits. In fact, they thought it was so tasty that I know that Pa and Ma, my grandparents, they wouldn't mow the area around the tree for several months, waiting for the tree saplings to come up in springtime. And, you know, Paul would collect those metal coffee cans all year long, and he would transpose those saplings and give them away because they thought that the taste of the pecans here were that good. Now, right now, it is what they call topped. The owner told me that they had to do that one a few years ago. I will say this, sometimes in the mid-'80s, my grandparents did the same thing. I don't really know why. Some people say you shouldn't do it. I think it's because of when they get really, really big, there's a chance that the wind can knock them over sometimes. But this pecan tree right now is huge considering its age. And that's because pecan trees love water, and right across the street from them, well, actually, houses, is Lido Lake. So I imagine the water table is pretty high in this area, so that taproot could get fairly deep quick. Because I know being planted in the 60s, it was huge enough for us to climb on way high by the time I was here in the late 70s, early 80s. So this particular pecan tree, it grew out in the open, unlike a lot of pecan trees in forests, which is why it started sprouting roots fairly closely. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 within maybe 10 feet. So it doesn't have to go too high to start spreading out when there's not much competition with other trees. Which is why a lot of times pecans from open areas aren't my ideal section, because really from about here to about there is all the wood I use for big bowls. And this is the size tree I like for bowls, because my general rule of thumb is if you can reach around it, I don't really want it. So I can barely reach around halfway through. And if you think about it, you have the tree right here. If the midpoint, that's as big a bowl as I can get. And that makes a nice solid bowl. Now it's early September, so obviously we don't have any acorns available, especially because he mows a lot and it just gets chewed up. But I can remember my dad, every time he came visit, he would have a paper grocery sack, and he'd just fill it up with pecans at certain times of the year and take them home and eat them for a few months. That was one of his favorite snacks, being a Texan, of course. But to give you an example, here are the leaves. A long spine come out. They're generally smooth on the sides. This one has something going on with it, the spots, but normally they are fairly, I can't identify trees by leaves alone. But I will tell you, as a kid and a teenager, the bark really thick and grippy and lots of spikes on it. Nice, great, it's big chunky bark that breaks off quite easily, but it will cut up your hands when you're climbing. So this could be one reason why I have an affinity for pecan, because pecan is kind of the first tree I was introduced to in my memory, even before I was a woodworker. As a young kid, was central, this tree in the front of my grandparents' yard. I also got familiar with pear trees. My great-grandmother used to pick those. They had an orchard in the backyard to make some of the best pear preserves out there, and I've never found anywhere else that makes pear preserves. I think it's somewhat illegal for some reason. And then they also had peaches and apples. So, but it was nuts and fruits at my great-grandparents' place all summer long. And speaking of eating stuff, how about we head to some person that kind of specializes in using the real crop of a pecan tree. Jennifer, hello.
Hi.
Okay guys, I found Jennifer at the Berdoll Pecan and Candy Gift Company just a few miles down from the sawmill. So if you're going there, come on over and check this out, especially if you're bringing the family, because this might be a little bit more enjoyable to them. Jennifer is one of the owners. How long has your family been in doing this?
45 years.
45 years, and you started this company about the same time Brandon started the sawmill?
My husband and I purchased the retail and shipping and factory business from my parents 15 years ago.
So you've been in business a lot longer than that.
Yes.
Okay, y'all been doing this for a while. Okay, I just came from Abilene. I visited my grandparents' place. They had a giant pecan tree that I remembered out there, and I remember my grandfather used to brag about how well those pecans tasted. That's why he used to give away saplings to all the neighbors, hoping that they would all crossbreed and stuff like that. I don't know anything about pecans. What's the difference?
Well, there's different varieties of pecans, and the pecan tree is the tree of Texas.
Right.
And there's lots of different varieties. So there's thousands of varieties.
Thousands?
Thousands.
Okay.
Kind of like, you think of it kind of like apples. You have Gala apple, red delicious apple, different varieties. Here in our store, we have 3 varieties that I'm pretty familiar with, but throughout Texas, there can be thousands of different varieties.
Okay, most of the ones you're getting for this store come from here?
Yes.
The local area?
Local orchards, yes.
I saw an orchard down the street. Is that
2 miles behind us.
2 miles behind
Yes.
us?
Stores like us normally have pecans available, typically have pecans available in lots of different ways. So you can get pecans completely in the shell, and where they're graded in our in factories to pull out pecans that are grade-wise, like number 1s, number 2s, number 3s, because you want the biggest, plumpest pecans that you can find.
So it's based on the size and...
Size and the inside, like if they're...
Like cantaloupe, do you squeeze them a little bit or something?
No, they just...
Again, I'm an idiot.
No, that's okay. There's machines that take pictures of pecans and weigh them, where if it's full, if it weighs a lot, it's full. That means it's full of meat, like pecan meat. And so that's a good pecan. Pecans are also enjoyed cracked. So part of the work is done for you. Half of the shell is off. So it's much easier to get off. You've probably heard of native pecan trees that are in like parks. So those pecans are going to be really good, but they're really small.
Right.
And they're hard to get out of the shell. So a typical retail store will have paper shell pecans, which means they have a thin shell, and you can put 2 together to crack them open. They're also enjoyed already cracked. So there's machines that will crack about 800 pecans per minute. And part of the work is done for you, that the shell is off. And because it's a paper shell, it's easy just to get the extra part off. A lot of people enjoy cracked pecans and in-shell pecans. They sit by the fire, they watch football, something to do with their hands.
So you're telling me buying them in a shell just slows down your eating?
Yes.
Okay.
This is an example of shelled pecans. It's great for baking, it's great for eating, and you look for high quality pecans. You can see they're light in color, they're nice and big and plump, which results in a delicious pecan pie that has less bitterness and does not have a stale taste. Most people think of pecans in a pecan pie, but there are lots of different ways to enjoy a pecan. Honey glazed pecans, and they're great in salads. Chocolate caramel clusters like turtles or millionaires. Sweet habanero pecans. Roasted and salted pecans. Chocolate pecans make a great dessert.
Okay, are you really just sugarcoating a healthy snack here?
No, pecans are actually healthy. They contain 19 essential vitamins and minerals. They are great for a low cholesterol diet, and 90% of the fats in pecans are unsaturated.
Okay, I'm a woodworker. That's all great and fancy. I can see snacking on all that while I'm in the shop, wasting time thinking about what my next step is going to be. But I do know that walnut, hickory, and pecan are in the same family out there. And walnut oil is highly prized by us woodworkers because it's one of the only natural oils that fully cure. Is it somewhat similar with the pecan oil, or is it?
I'm not 100% sure about that, but I do know that pecan oil is great for cooking.
Okay, is it just like cooking with the other oils?
It has a high smoke point, a 470-degree smoke point.
Oh.
So it's great for sauteing fruits, vegetables. It's great as a
Popcorn.
salad dressing. Popcorn, perfect for chicken fried steak, popcorn, salad dressing.
Okay. Okay, the other aspect of walnuts as woodworkers use, I use it a lot of times in my turning, is just the shells, because I can add a little burnishing to the wood, and that burnishing adds a little bit of color to like divots or texturing and stuff like that. Places like this, do they also sell shells to us?
Yes, we sell lots of pecan shells. Places like ours often sell pecan shells in bags similar to this. Gardeners love to use it for mulch, and here in Texas, we love to put it in smokers.
Yes.
We recently donated mini loads to the Zilker Botanical Gardens to use in their gardening beds.
Oh, I imagine they come out quite a bit for those.
They call and ask when when bags are ready.
Okay.
But Sean, if you really want to dive deep into pecans, you need to talk to a geneticist.
No, it's mine. It's mine. So here we are at the Fort Parker Pecan tree. I actually thought it was part of the Fort Parker Memorial Park, which is just right over there, but it's in the field right next to it. That's private property. So I don't want to get shot, so I'm not going to go walk out to it. but it is recorded as the 7th largest known pecan tree in the country right now. And the thing is, they came out to it about 3 years ago, and they are guesstimating that it is over 250 years old. Let me just tell you about the size of this thing. I got these facts right here. Its circumference is 225 inches, or about almost 19 feet. It sits about 100 feet tall, and its crown is about 130 feet. And at its age, I mean, it is basically watched Texas from the get-go. And it has a little bit of a unique history that combines a little bit of hanky-panky, a little bit of cowboys and Indians, a little bit of kidnapping. And then, well, I'm sure it was more horrific at the time, but, you know, Indian married the kidnapped daughter, and he grows up to be chieftain and takes his tribe and saves lots of lives, both whites and natives, in the transition to reservation land. Now, back in the mid-1700s, you know, a tree like that was commonly left in the middle of a farm field or a ranch field, simply because it gave a place for the farmer to rest midway through the day. It's also kind of commonly known that, you know, if you have a bunch of kids in a very small house, you know, that lunchtime picnic with the wife might be the only time you had to make more kids. So that tree, left by a lot of ranchers in the middle of a field, was a kind of a common deal. Also, the fact that when this land was settled back in the mid-1700s, that tree was probably already enormous, so somebody wouldn't want to be cutting it down with hand tools. So leave the biggest one there is out there. Those cows out there will give you a good idea how wide that trunk is, because looking at that, it's basically one's cow length from nose to tail wide. That thing is huge. But I do want you to notice something. The branches are almost coming out a little bit above the cows. Basically, trees that grew in the middle of a field, and this is part of the Blackland Prairie in Texas, which basically stretch from the Red River down to San Antonio. And for millennium, we're talking 16 to 20,000 years, it was just pure grassland with occasional trees like that in the middle of a field, because bison, buffalo, would make a yearly migration north and south. And because it was grasslands, there was actually fire controlled. Lightning would oftentimes hit the grasslands, and they would just burn down every 5 to 10 years. And if they didn't burn down in that cycle, the Native Americans would actually light it on fire to make it more appealing to bison that they were hunting as hunters traveling with the herds. So that tree, the fact that it survived just long enough to get above where deer and bison could eat it, meant it could grow like that. And then from there, the branches just spread out because it didn't need to compete with other trees. So as big as that tree is, there really isn't much commercial grade lumber in it, because basically you're only talking about a foot above the ground to wherever that first branch is, and if it's just above where deer can get it, that ain't much. Unfortunately, this field right here, you know, they've been farming it for so long, they say less than 1% of the native vegetation of the Texas Blacklands is still out there. I think there's a little preserve of like a field or two, and that's it. This used to be some of the richest soil in the world because bison making fertilizer, grasslands burning. It was called the Blackland because the soil was literally black from all the carbon put into it. And because of it burning grass and stuff like that, it was a little bit waxy. So rodents didn't really like getting into it, burrowing into it, eating up roots and stuff like that, which is why trees like that could get so big. Now, the reason why it is called the Parker Pecan, and this is the Parker Memorial Park, is because Sarah and Elder John Parker were kind of the ones that were settling this area in the early 1800s. You know, they kind of cleared the fields for farming and stuff like that. They built those small cabins, and there was a threat of Indian raids back in the early 1800s. So they built one of those classic kind of movie theater forts with the wood stakes all the way around for settlers to return to in case of danger. And in one instance right there, when all the men were out working the fields, there was a raid on the fort. And there were 5 men protecting the women and children at the time. Most of the women and children escaped. Those 5 men died, and they are buried in that memorial park right down there. But a handful of the children were kidnapped by the Indians, which was a common practice at the time. Nomad Indians oftentimes kidnapped children to bring them into their tribe. It wasn't so much as breeding them up, it was absorbing new members. One of those youngsters that got kidnapped, and when I say youngsters, I mean they were young to be adopted into these tribes, eventually married one of the Comanche warriors and bore them 2 sons and a daughter. One of those sons became the last Comanche chief to surrender to the Americans, and he spent the rest of his life trying to make his tribesmen's lives better on the reservations. His name, I have it written down because I just do not know how to pronounce it, was Quanon Parker. I think it's kind of cool that they kept the Parker name, even though it was the mother's side of the family. He was chief of the Kuahadi tribe. Again, I'm sorry for mispronouncing that. But Chief Quanon Parker, he spent 30 years on that reservation making his tribesmen's lives better. Kind of cool. And all within shadow's distance of that tree there. So let's get back on the road and head over to that geneticist. Dr. Chatwin?
Hi.
Hey, Sean Graham. Nice
to meet you, Sean.
USDA, pecan research,
Yep.
genetics, all that kind of stuff. So can you tell me what y'all do here?
Absolutely. So I'm Warren Chatwin. I've been working in tree genetics for my entire scientific career, changing across various species to get where I am today, from oaks to chestnuts to walnuts to ending up now in pecans.
Is there a lot of variation between them?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. A lot of the techniques are the same, but there's a lot of variation.
Why pecan now? If you've gone through all the others and you're ending up with pecan's obviously the best, right?
Pecan is the best. Yes, definitely. Largely why pecan is because right now the pecan industry is very, very supportive of taking and modernizing our breeding program that we operate here at the USDA.
Why is that?
We've been operating this breeding program since 1930, so we're coming up on 100 years real fast. It even predates the USDA as a government agency.
From what I understand, the pecan industry is kind of new in terms of all of agriculture.
Absolutely. It is a very young crop. The pecans have only been cultivated for about 150 years in an orchard setting by human beings.
Really?
Only that long. So compare that to walnuts, which are their closest relative in a commercial species, and they've had thousands of years of human selection, intervention, orchards, everything from seedling orchards way back when to now the
even in Europe and stuff like that, walnuts are around, but pecans aren't over there.
Pecans are a North American exclusive.
Cool. Just southern U.S. or because I know we have pecan food here, and when I traveled up north, they don't have it.
Right. The native range of pecan kind of starts to peter out about central Illinois. as far as northern goes. Now, some of its wild relatives, the hickories, can go all the way up into Canada.
Right.
But its cold tolerance limits how far north pecan goes, and it covers Texas, native through to the eastern seaboard effectively, and covers the large kind of mid-central U.S. region.
Plantation regions.
Yes.
Cool.
Let me show you the orchard.
Cool.
Part of our lease with Texas A&M here, you'll notice that some of this is definitely not pecans. That's corn, in addition to the Wild Creek bed here. But part of our lease with Texas A&M we have for this site is any land we're not actively using for pecan cultivation. Texas A&M students get to use to practice farming, to operate tractors, and so this corn that they just harvested here is grown on this land for that purpose.
Cool. Students get to tear stuff up.
Yeah, they get to learn about farming and the both exciting things and the accidents that happen in the process.
Is that a drone?
Yeah, that's a drone. We have some USDA scientists who operate drones and are evaluating how we can use drones better in getting information and data on young pecans. And so they're flying these orchards, capturing aerial imagery that's going to let us evaluate things like tree height, crop load in the future, and other characteristics.
Can I assume that people that need to find wild pecans could use what you learned to find a tree out in the middle of a forest now?
You definitely could. There are some characteristics you could use to help find pecans or their wild relatives, the hickories, and aerial imagery is one way to be able to do that. So as we come into this orchard here, you'll notice there's some red paint lines on these trees. Those red paint lines represent where these trees were grafted. So these are all going to be trees in these orchards that are from elsewhere, and the roots are genetically different than the top.
Cool. So what's grafting again?
So grafting is a way of plant propagation that allows you to get the same performance of a specific kind. So if you have a tree that works really well, think about a gala apple. All the gala apples come from one original gala tree who had its branches taken off and then propagated onto different roots to make lots of individual freestanding trees. And so pecan and cultivation works the same way.
Okay.
And
that's
so
basically what you did. That red line just tells you that this is a propagate tree?
It tells us that this is a grafted tree, so above that paint line is genetically different than beneath it.
Cool. And what's the red tags in the tree for?
The red tags in the tree, we'll get a little closer to it here, but those are part of what we're doing in our breeding program. So those flagged locations are where we have made a controlled pollination in the spring.
Oh, cool. And that the little bags or something?
So there's little bags on there. It's actually sausage casing, clear cellulose sausage casing that we use to put around the female flower.
Don't tell me you sacrificed barbecue for this.
Yeah, well, it comes full circle, right? A lot of people are using hickory and pecan wood in barbecue, so it does full circle.
Okay.
This orchard is a collection of native pecan genetics and seedlings from across their entire geographic range.
Okay.
Our program here, we operate both a breeding program as well as a collection of genetic diversity for pecans and hickories. Our breeding program was established in 1930.
Here?
It's established by the USDA in Brownwood, Texas.
Okay.
And so that's about 3.5 hours away from where we are standing right now.
Okay.
And that's where the home of this program was from the 1930s to around the mid-80s.
Okay.
When
Why'd they change?
This field site was established. There were a few reasons, and we still do maintain and operate Brownwood today as a field site. But a large part of the reason is that the climate in Brownwood is a little more western, and it was a little challenging as a breeding program to get enough disease expression of pecan leaf and nut scab, which is the biggest commercial disease that affects pecan.
Okay.
And so moving to this site allowed us to have better pecan disease expression
Okay.
here. And also, this was an area that was established as part of the National Collection of Genetic Resources for Pecans and Hickories, where we maintain diversity of pecans, both native and named varieties, as living collections, because pecans, like most fruit and nut trees, cannot use seed banks.
Okay.
They have a seed biology that requires it to stay wet to be able to stay alive.
Oh, I
So
didn't
things
know
like,
that.
yeah, corn and cotton and other row crops, they can all dehydrate, add water, and they will come back. And that's the basis of what makes it into a seed bank.
Okay.
They're seeds that can be brought back from a dehydrated state. So with pecan trees, like walnuts and other fruit and nut trees, we need to maintain diversity as living collections.
Oh, I did not know that.
As part of that, this location was established to be part of that germplasm collection. And this orchard we're standing in now was part of a large seed collection in the 1980s to bring pecan seed from across the entire range of pecan, from central Mexico all the way to Illinois, out to the East Coast, and have living examples of that genetic diversity here. And it creates a lot of variation all throughout this orchard. The two trees that I'm standing behind right now are both trees from the extreme south central Mexico range. And you can see how different they are. This tree here is kind of a weeping kind of, structure. It's a very short statured tree, planted at the same time as this other tree, which is one of the biggest, tallest, most vigorous trees that we have in our entire collection. And
Okay, just question. Is this like the most northern that Mexican tree can go? Is that?
yeah, so these pecan trees here are grown in this location because these germplasm collections were established in places that, while perhaps not the best for the performance of individual trees, allows them to stay alive. And so this is about as far north as these Mexican pecan trees can grow without being severely affected by cold and potentially dying from freezes.
So it's here because of archival reasons,
Yes.
not necessary performance reasons.
Absolutely. So
Oh,
we're
okay.
maintaining this outside of its native location in a place where we can have all this diversity together as a backup in the event of something catastrophic happening.
Okay.
All right, so we've moved from our native diversity orchard to this one as our cultivated diversity orchard.
Okay.
And so in this orchard, we have, instead of native trees on their own roots, we have propagated trees that are from original trees that are all around the US that we've taken a cutting of wood from and put that cutting of wood and grafted it onto a different set of roots to be able to grow all these trees in the same location.
Okay. Is there a reason why those trees couldn't survive on their own here without being on these roots?
Part of that is a technological limitation in our ability to propagate pecans.
Oh.
Getting that tree to grow with its own roots here requires some techniques that don't function yet for pecans very well.
Oh, okay.
So here at this pecan tree in our cultivated collection, we've got this red paint that surrounds the location where this tree was originally cut. And then in this case, Schley being the name of the tree grafted here, where that wood was placed on here. And so above this red paint line, it is genetically different than below these roots, or than below this paint line.
And that's why the bark's so different from above and beyond?
And that's why the bark is so different from the top to the bottom, because these are two genetically different individuals, not even really that related.
How old are the trees when you do this grafting?
So typically, it's best done when they are, 2 to 3 years old. You can do it as old as maybe 10 years or 15 years. What
Really?
limits you is how big that trunk gets. It has to be small enough that when you propagate it, when you put that dormant stick on, that it can still heal over all the way.
Okay. And you don't have to worry about lining up cambium layers and that kind of stuff?
So you do in the grafting process.
Oh.
So if you have the big stump and you're grafting, you're basically putting a single or a couple sticks right on the outside to line up those cambium layers where they will fuse and grow together. And then the tree heals that wound that is the rest of the cut stump. To eventually you end up with a solitary full tree again.
Cool. Is that wood any stronger at that point? Kind of like two welds, the weld is generally stronger than the... That's a woodworker question, I know.
Yeah, I don't...
Probably not something y'all
I don't
research.
know. I know that if you cut the slab, you will notice visible differences between the two different trees and their wood here.
Cool.
I don't hear much about trees breaking at the graft line once they're established, so they very well could be stronger.
Okay. What's the sticker all about?
So the sticker in these tags here, you'll notice we have two different kinds of tags. We've got this long metal tag down here, and then we have this tag up here with a little more detail on it. As part of a collection.
The metal tag, that's like going all the way through the tree.
Yeah, so this is long sheets of strip metal that we just emboss with the orchard location and often the name, and that gets nailed right to the tree. I know it makes all the woodworkers really sad when you get logs there, but that's nailed in, and that's one of the ways that we can have a long-term record of this tree and what it is in this location. It's supplemented with more informative labels like the kind here that tell us the orchard location, the tree's name, its source, where it came from, and inside our records what the numbers are to look for that, as well as the date that it was grafted. And so as part of a collection, maintaining diversity outside of where it naturally occurs, records are extremely critical. And so we not only have records of this tree and its source, but also the history of this tree, where it came from, everything that is known about this particular cultivar. And this example, Schley, is one that's been critical to pecan breeding efforts. A large majority of the breeding genetics used in breeding is coming from this Schley tree right here as a parent.
Well, is it old wives? I've heard rumor of like a mother tree, like in the 30s or 20s or something like that. Some guy won a pecan orchard contest, so they bred every tree, or they grafted every tree that we're kind of using today from that one. Is that just kind of a wives' tale?
Some of that is a wives' tale, but there's also a lot of truth in that.
Oh.
There is an orchard in San Saba, Texas, where E.E. Rizian was an old famous pecan breeder back in his time, and so he was one of the first to really be taking and making controlled pollinations with different pecans, and a lot of the cultivars that he had put out have been the basis for modern breeding efforts today.
So the entire industry is based on one guy's effort 100 years ago, somewhat?
A few guys' efforts.
A few guys' efforts.
An important thing here is pecans take so long to make nuts and to grow that breeding is a 30-year process often.
Multi-career process?
Multi-career, generational. And so in our breeding program, probably the most advanced pecan tree is about 5 generations away from the wild. So these are still very wild forest trees, and we deal with a lot of the behaviors that they have as forest trees, like trying to outcompete the squirrels and make a very big crop followed by a very small crop in previous years. And so obviously for income,
that's every year, every other year or something?
Yeah. Yep, so they're trying to start more and make so many nuts in one year that the squirrels can't possibly eat all of them.
Oh, okay.
So a few make it out, a few survive, and it's a wild mechanism, but it influences how we have to do pecan breeding.
So because they're so close to the wild stuff, is even within one crop, is there just a lot more diversity than you would see in other species?
Absolutely. Even comparing to walnuts, where they've had a lot more time, where humans have selected traits and over 1,000 years of human intervention, we don't have that here. So while there are 4 or 5 pecan cultivar lines like Schley that are very prevalent in the background of breeding, as a whole, they are still very diverse, simply because of how diverse these native trees are. They haven't been selected down for many, many generations to get to a few valuable traits. So pecan breeding as a whole, our cycle right now takes on average about 28 years to go from when we make a controlled pollination all the way through the testing process to evaluate if that individual nut and resulting tree is better than anything else currently on the market for pecan growers.
Okay, that doesn't mean that your entire career is waiting on one tree to grow, is it?
No, definitely not.
Okay.
Every year in our breeding program, we're making around 20 to 30 controlled pollinations, which will be multiple flowers all over the tree. And it results in about 1,000 nuts that are grown for young seedling trees every year. And so those nuts are taken and they are grown for a year to get a little bit bigger, and then they're evaluated for susceptibility to a leaf scab disease. From there we cull out.
How long until that happens? You can do that?
As soon as they make leaves.
Oh, okay.
And so it happens usually in their second year. Then they will go ahead and We'll evaluate them for that. That lets us throw out about 30 to 50% of what we've made in 1 year.
Okay, so you're down to 500 trees in one of your 20
Right.
selections.
Right. Yep. Down to 500 trees in one of the 20 crosses, as we call them, for that year. From there, they are taken and they're planted out on their own roots.
Okay.
And in this 28-year average period of testing, almost the majority of that time is spent waiting for the tree to make nuts.
Huh.
So,
How long until they make their first crop of nuts?
yeah, so when we plant a pecan tree, it'll start making nuts often about 7 to 10 years after that cross is made.
Okay, I know in some fruits, those first few years, the fruit isn't very good. So after that first crop, are you kind of trashing a few years of crops?
There's very limited light production for the first couple of years until they come into a cycle. And so at about the 10-year mark after one of those pecan trees is planted, then we're going to be coming back to it traditionally, and we will be taking nut measurements, disease ratings. We'll evaluate the performance of that tree for 4 years. And we need 4 years because of that big crop, small crop, big crop, small crop cycle these trees naturally do. And so already we're at about 15 years of time since that cross was made. From there, in those orchards that are trees planted on their own roots for making nuts, we pick the best of the best, and those move from there and they get propagated just like this tree here, where they will be taken and they will be grafted into multiple copies into an orchard where their commercial performance will be evaluated.
Okay, so now we're talking 20 years
So that's
from the first tree being planted?
It's going to be about 15 years when they're selected and moved over. From there, when you graft a pecan, it takes less time for it to produce nuts again.
Oh, okay.
Because we're taking mature wood and putting it on juvenile roots again. So it takes about 3 to 5 years to start making nuts again after that propagation period. That's also one of the major reasons pecan orchards are propagated, because you can get nuts faster.
Okay.
That way. So at 3 to 5 years waiting for nuts, so now we're at about 20 years, we got to get, again, 4 years of cycle data, except this time we're doing it with 6 copies of one of these trees under selection and against known commercial varieties that are in there as controls in our scientific experiments. And so getting another 4 years of data puts us about 25 years writing things up, publications, getting that ready for release to commercial growers. Takes up the last couple of years, and then we're at that 28-year window. And that is a couple careers. It's a very long time, and it's very rare that a pecan breeder in this process gets to work with trees that they created and release trees that they created nearly 30 years before.
So your end results are basically built upon people that were 2 generations before you?
Standing on the shoulders of giants.
Okay.
We very much inherit what we have and our potential to move forward.
Okay, now you mentioned we're about 5 generations out from wild. In those 5 generations, is that where have y'all? I just know I came from a candy store and they were selling thin-shelled pecans versus wide one, and is that one of the biggest things y'all have accomplished in these 5 generations?
Absolutely. So we've been able to take things from wild pecans and make the shells thinner so you can hand crack them, to be able to make the kernels bigger, to provide more disease resistance. And one of the most important things is to move their maturity window, the time of year when those nuts mature, forward about a month, so they can make nuts faster, so they can be able to get the farmers to be able to harvest them and get out of the crop and be able to make it to a lot of these holiday markets that y'all know pecans really well for.
So in 5 generations, have y'all changed the taste as much? Would my ice cream in 1930 taste differently than pecan praline ice cream today?
I would say that the answer to that is that yes, it probably would taste different. But one thing to be aware of is in our pecan breeding efforts, the majority of the focus has not been on things that are very individual or subjective, like taste. It'll vary from one person to another, and it's hard to have a standardized way to be measuring taste. So our breeding efforts have been focused on tree performance. Has that affected taste? Yes. There are a wide variety of pecans that do taste good, and there are some, like the very biggest pecan that exists, that is huge, it's massive, and it tastes like cardboard.
Oh, gross.
You would never eat it. So it is a factor that's in there, and it's something as a research program that we are looking at doing more with. We did some taste tests on some of our breeding lines for one of the first times recently, a couple of years ago. And we have better science now that allows us to take something subjective and help make it more measurable so that we can actually use that in selecting trees. Okay. So I've kind of talked to you about where we have been in pecan breeding, kind of the history of where we're at, what that process looks like for us, as well as the importance of maintaining diversity collections outside of the wild. Next, I want to go ahead and show you about where we're going and the future of pecan breeding. And on the way, we're going to see a few orchards, and I'll get to show you some of these different stages of the breeding program in action.
Well, before we go there, just a quick question, because, you know, I'm a woodworker, and I'm drooling a little bit looking at these nice long rows of mature pecans, because I can see lots of cadavers I could be doing with them. How long do these stay there, or do these ever get used up when plantations? Do plantations get too old, and then they get sent to us?
So commercially, yes.
Commercially, yes.
Commercially, yes. In this case, no. But there are some different ways that we will be managing this orchard going forward. Because each individual tree is unique and needs to be preserved. With the individual value of each tree, we can't cut out every other row like a commercial orchard would do here to make sure they're getting enough light.
Okay.
So we're actually going to be moving toward keeping these trees alive, but actually coming and hedging back a lot of the branches to open up the canopy so they can get enough light.
Oh, okay.
One thing about pecans is they hate shade. And you can see it in the canopy structures of these trees here. They don't have a big, broad lateral canopy like you would see in a wild tree.
Right.
Or a tree in a big open field. This is the artifact of not getting enough light.
Okay.
And so we need to fix that mechanically instead of by clearing out trees.
How long do you think these will be around? I mean,
so
200 years?
So these trees themselves, I would say...
I'm asking because will I still be alive to come make some bowls?
I would say that these trees here are probably going to have about another 80 to 100 years in them. A lot of that just depends on the spacing questions here and having enough light. If it ever gets to the point where the trees are dying because they can't get enough light, we will be taking and repropagating copies of these trees from their graft wood out onto new single stems.
So preserving the genetics.
And preserving the genetics, because that's our primary goal here. So some of these trees will be big, they will be around a long time. You indirectly asked about it, but for a commercial orchard, they're going to be cycling, at the oldest, they're going to be about 80 to 100 years old, but oftentimes around 40 to 60 years is when they'll be cycling out, often for newer varieties or the performance is decreased over time.
Okay. Well, 60 years isn't big enough to make a very wide board.
No. So as we navigate out of some of these orchards, I want to tell you some stories about some of the really cool older cultivars and historic cultivars we have in here. So one of the most historically significant ones that we have in here is called Centennial. And it was named Centennial because it was given its name at the 1876 World Fair. To take you back 20 years from there, in about the 1850s is when the first time pecan grafting was successfully figured out.
Okay.
And it was done at the Oak Alley Plantation, Louisiana, by a slave gardener named Antoine. He's a very talented man. He has no known last name. But Antoine figured out how to graft a pecan tree successfully so we could have uniform performance across an entire orchard. And those nuts being exhibited at the 1876 World Fair, the judge decided to name them Centennial. And they were so very impressed with their quality and shape. And so we have copies of that original tree and graft wood here in the orchard.
Cool.
We also have in here a tree that was given out by Thomas Jefferson to a Catholic school in Washington, D.C. Thomas Jefferson, you may not know, was an avid nut collector. He loved growing nut trees of all different kinds.
He was also a bit crazy.
Well, sometimes being nuts and loving nut trees go together well. But he loved to get these things out as gifts. And so through our program, we've been able to find both an oral account and have a verbal account of the history of this particular tree with this religious school in DC, and knowing that came from Thomas Jefferson. As you look off at this closest orchard we can see past the cornfields,
Okay.
You'll notice the visible differences that occur in pecans from different genetic backgrounds. So in this case, every fourth row, or every fifth row really, here is one particular cultivar named Kanza, and the rest are all grafted Pawnees. And so the ones that have lost all their leaves, those are all Pawnees. And the purpose of that orchard is we're trying to actually put some quantifiable numbers to the effect that different rootstocks have on the performance of the same grafted copy of a tree, grafted scion. And
so you're saying the top section is all one species,
is all
but
one,
the roots are different.
The roots are different here, and there are different root families, effectively, used across different parts of the pecan cultivation region.
Cool.
So this uses a mix of southern ones, northern ones, eastern ones, western ones, and then looks at how those different roots, their effects they have on pecans. And while they're just starting to be old enough to make nuts, what we have been able to say so far is that using southern roots will make the timing of when they put out their leaves in the spring and break bud to be about a week or two earlier sometimes than if you have a northern tree, which will delay it by a week or two.
Oh.
And so the roots that you graft these trees onto, while they'll make the same nuts, the nuts will look the same, they'll taste the same, you can affect the performance of a tree in its area based on the roots you use.
Cool. Now, is this part of the Blacklands of Texas? I noticed the dirt's kind of clayish brown, but it's not black. Not really.
No, we're not really part of the Blacklands here, but we are in the Brazos River bottom. So this is old river bottom that used to flood regularly, and it's deep, rich soil. Pecans are really a tree that natively likes to be in river bottoms and places where they get plenty of water.
Yeah.
Part of the interesting biological reason for that is because if you think about, let's change the mental topics here to a coconut. You cut a coconut open, there's a lot of liquid inside. Mm-hmm. Pecan trees, the nuts start out as a liquid. They start out as water.
Oh.
So from the water that a tree gets from when it flowers in about April or May to about late July, early August, that gives the size of the nut.
Oh, so the rain in the early spring will give you a bigger nut.
Gives you a bigger nut. And around August, there's a short, about week or 2 week window where the water that they get during that time is what actually starts making the kernel you eat.
Oh.
So it comes in and it fills out, starts as a water, turns into a gel and a dough, and to eventually to be the kernel you know. But all that happens, needs water about that 2 week period. And if you don't get water at that time, you will have big nuts with empty shells.
Okay.
So that's why they love to natively be in these wet river bottom areas so they can have sufficient water. So we've got, just notice some fences around here that have got some big net wire at the bottom, along with some barbed wire. We have big issues with wild feral hogs here in this part of Texas.
Wow, all of Texas right now.
Yeah, and it's to the point that there are some orchards that we can't really harvest in because the ground gets so rutted up that our harvesting equipment needs a flat, plain area to be able to pick up nuts effectively.
Did the hogs damage the trees at all, or are they just eating the pecans?
Not particularly. They're eating the pecans. They're looking for truffles growing in the soil, and they love to just root around and dig around. But it does create it, so it creates problems for our orchard. So we're actually fencing out a lot of our orchards, probably about 2/3 of the 300-acre plot that we're on here, to be able to exclude hogs. So we spend less time regrading orchards to be flat, to be able to mow them, drive tractors in them, and harvest in them. Here in the native diversity collection orchard, here at the very edge of it, we have some important native trees that are present here. And a lot of these are ones that are historically important, such as the La Bahia tree.
Yeah, I'm going to go see that in a second.
Oh, cool. Yeah, from Washington on the Brazos Park. That's a tree that was very important, really historically. I'm sure you'll hear a little bit more about the history of that park and the significant events that happened there later as Texas declared its independence from Mexico. But the La Bahia tree is a tree that was was there about 1830. And it was at a popular trade route that went through that area. And it very likely was a pecan that fell out of somebody's saddlebag, ended up there. And we've been able to verify with genetics that La Bahia tree has genetics that are, the closest match is about 900 miles south in Mexico. And so that tree, that pecan, came from way far south in Mexico and then ended up in Washington on the Brazos.
900 miles by foot.
By foot.
Okay.
and along with a copy of that tree, the graft wood that we have in this orchard here to preserve it, we have other trees that share similar genetics, so that Mexican genetics, right along here with it in this same row.
Cool. So that's the La Baja tree he was just talking about. It sits on the bluff right above the Brazos River, right where the Navasota River combines. This was a walking path for centuries. And that tree dates prior to the original settlers here in 1821. They documented back there. So that tree oversaw the birth of Texas and the fact that Washington, Texas, Washington on the Brazos, was the first capital of Texas. So it all oversaw the founding of Texas and that kind of stuff. Very famous tree. I have heard that it is in decline. It might not last too much longer. It looks like that they've done some recent tree work to it right there, but man, that thing is massive. Let me walk you over towards it so you can just see how big it is. Yeah, I'd say it's pretty massive. At least it's wider than me, and I'm pretty wide.
So as we drive past this orchard here, this one, as a geneticist, is one of the most valuable orchards for me in the entire area, or entire location. This is a collection of 400 full siblings of a Mexican native pecan and a northern improved pecan cultivar. As you can imagine, there are a lot of differences between a northern pecan and a southern pecan. Things like nut size, shape, when they put on their leaves, when their leaves fall down, angles of the branches, so many things. And the traditional way to connect genetics to the things you observe in the trees is by using lots and lots of full siblings.
Yeah.
And so this is really the closest to a gold standard population we have to do that in pecans. We have 400 genetically verified full siblings here. We have another 400 at the sister.
When you say full sibling, what do you mean?
I mean like your same mother, same father.
Okay.
Whereas half sibling could be same of one different parent. And we have 400 trees here at this location. We have a sister research group in the USDA ARS in Byron, Georgia. They have another 400 of these trees, so we can do different environments on this. And then we have at University of Georgia, they have another small population of these trees. The way we do this is we use math, and you notice or you think about how different you are from your siblings. Differences may be subtle, but if there were 400 of you, you'd see all the variation that your parents' genetics have as those chromosomes are mixed in different ways. And so we take all those differences and then we use some genetics and math to construct a map of each chromosome and which parts are being moved around. And then we can take our observations, put them on that map, and say, okay, at this spot of chromosome 3 is something that affects nut size or affects wood density. Already we're seeing in this population some issues with weak-wooded parents, because some of the parents have very weak wood. Their branches break out real easy.
Okay.
And in high windstorms, they will lose limbs. So we're also getting negative associations of genetics like that, negative traits, so that we know what to be avoiding in breeding.
And the high fence is
The high fence is for deer while they're young.
They could wipe out the entire experiment.
They can, but their deer are really only a problem while the trees are about 3 feet tall or less.
Okay.
When they can grab them and with their tongue just strip all the leaves off at one time. So now that they're about this size, we're pretty good. We really only need the hog fence, but we keep the deer fence there because who wants to do all that work?
It's already there.
So the orchards that you're seeing here, these are the trees actively under evaluation in pecan breeding right now. And so these are those trees that we're waiting 7 to 10 years for them to make nuts, and we're gathering the data to decide who moves on to our next set of orchards. A large part of what's happening in this is we need to get up and get inside these trees and in their canopies to get nuts from them each year to evaluate their quality. And one of the critical pieces of equipment that we use for that are these mobile tripod bucket lifts right here. So we'll come up and see one of our technicians up here collecting nut samples for our quality evaluations.
He's up on a bucket up there?
Yep.
Okay.
So And there you'll see, this is Hayden, he's one of our undergraduates. But he's up there getting nut samples from these trees. We hand harvest from each tree to make sure that we are getting the genetics associated with that tree. We obviously couldn't guarantee it if we picked it up off the ground, which tree it came from.
That makes sense. I hadn't thought of that. So he's having to bag everything up there and label it before he comes down?
Yep, so he's got paper bags up there that are pre-labeled for this, and he'll collect 15 nuts from one of those trees, get them in a bag, and that'll get taken and sent off to our Brownwood site where our technician does the nut quality analysis.
Okay.
But these orchard lifts are one of the most useful tools we use across our entire program, because we need to get up in these trees often to look at diseases, to look at nut quality. And so these are an amazing tool. They're just a diesel engine and self-propelled. You can drive it from the cab with a joystick. And he's up there in a safety harness. And,
okay.
Yep.
That would scare the hell out of me.
Yeah, and so you can't be scared of heights in this business. So here we're starting to pass the trees that are under active evaluation to trees that have already been disqualified by previous breeders. Now, for a long time over the near 100-year history of our program, it has not been very well supported financially. It hasn't had a lot of funding, which limits people and manpower. And so we've had multiple orchards. I've got about 40 to 60 acres at this site and 60 acres at another site, at a Brownwood site, that are trees that are disqualified, but there was never manpower or finances to cut them down. And so they're here, and we're now actively having to work to clean up and to get this land available, because they are on our best land that we want to put our new tests on. So there's a lot of work as our program rebuilds itself and really moves forward into the future aggressively.
So pretty soon this will be all a new orchard starting?
Yep. It'll be new orchards, and really this whole process of the increased funding and support for pecan breeding and genetics has happened because pecan growers and stakeholders have banded together to work with Congress to make their needs known through the National Pecan Federation. And it's those direct efforts are what has led to a more than $3 million increase to our program specifically in funding, and more than $18 to $20 million of funding for pecan genetics and breeding research and shelling and processing research across all the USDA pecan research programs.
And this would be?
So this is our pecan nut library. Much like you go to a library for books, we have a library of pecans here that we take and we maintain. These are all named cultivated pecans here in this cabinet.
These are all from your orchards here?
Yeah, all of these are from various USDA orchards and sometimes other locations. But while the kernels inside are long dead, and these will never grow, the size and shape of the nuts is very useful for us in doing identification of things. If someone says, what kind of pecan do I have? This is our resource for that, as well as documenting all of our native seed collections. This collection as a whole is getting ready to move into a new space. So we've got some things bagged and boxed and getting ready as we have a new space being built to house this. So back here is our laboratory. And in here, this is where a lot of the genetics and plant disease research we have is going to be taking place. This is a brand new facility. We got it turned over to us at the beginning of this year and had a ribbon cutting ceremony. And we're now filling out and hiring the scientists to be able to fill this position, or this lab. What we have in here is not just freezers and things for preserving samples. We have behind you some growth chambers for growing plants in controlled conditions, being able to do some controlled disease inoculations. We have a big walk-in growing chamber for cold things, as well as for holding a lot of our nuts that we're harvesting from all those orchards before some of those get planted or sent off for quality analysis. We have dedicated rooms for genetics and for DNA sequencing, and we still have equipment that was delivered even yesterday.
Cool.
We're getting to get things filled out in here. So we have genetic spaces, we have room for plant disease back here. But the reason why this space is so critical for us in pecan breeding is because that 28-year time window for breeding pecans is so long. And we need to do everything we can to shorten that. And one of the best tools we have for that are in recent developments in genetics that have techniques that allow us to be able to predict mature pecan traits like nut size or shape or disease resistance, or things like wood quality in baby pecan trees that are in their first year. They're this big. And so my role as a geneticist is in making initially those connections between genetics and our observations, and then using those in mathematical models to predict in baby pecan trees the breeding. And that will let us cut 10 years off of that 28-year breeding cycle to be able to move this faster.
Sounds
Put it
good.
within one career, not two.
Make you more efficient.
Yeah, and more accurate. All right, so here we're going to demonstrate what the pecan harvest looks like. And so this is what shaking an individual tree is. We have a tractor, and we have our shaker mounted on the back of the tractor. They're going to go ahead, and our technician Braden is going to back up the tractor, and you see those black rubber pads. He's going to enclose those around the trunk, and he's going to clamp onto the trunk, and then activate that shaker, and it's going to vibrate that whole tree, which is going to knock down the crop out of that tree that we'll then be able to harvest from the ground.
And most pecans are harvested from the ground.
Yes, commercially, this is how you do it, and commercially they'll just shake entire rows and then use equipment to blow the pecans to the middle and then harvest and pick all that up at one time.
After that first one, that has to damage the roots, doesn't it?
It definitely damages some of the wood inside, and it likely causes some damage to the roots.
Yeesh.
Yep, it's hard for us to see what happens below the ground, but it does shorten the commercial life of a commercial pecan tree to be able to have this aggressive shaking that's happening every year to be able to get all the crop out for harvest. And it would have impacts on the wood quality, I would assume, of that tree. And especially if the operator is not careful, those rubber pads can rub the bark off the trunk, creating massive wounds that tree will never heal from. So what we've got going on here is Braden is using our harvester. This is our bigger commercial harvester, that when those nuts are shaken onto the ground,
Right.
they've got to pick them up. And so it's got like a chain link fence almost underneath it that grabs the nuts, pulls them up, and deposits them in a hopper while blowing out a lot of the leaves and dirt.
Okay, that's what that is. So it's separating them inside the machine.
Yep, it's separating them and getting them to mostly just the nuts that are left. From here, we would take that product and we would process it through another blower that would blow out all the pecans that are too light, that didn't fill, and sort out the ones that wouldn't make grade. And then from there, we're left with the sellable pecans.
Yeah, that's what the candy lady was talking about. Okay, I have one important question for you though, because I am a woodworker.
Yeah.
All this breeding, all this research, all these careers at the end of it, are y'all taking into consideration the tree cadavers at all? The dead wood that I work with, is that consideration in genetics?
No, it's not really being considered. And that's mostly because we're evaluating the trees up to age 15.
Oh.
And time-wise, it just isn't quite a match there.
Who's going to stick around for 160 years to do this? I need that 160-year-old tree to make furniture.
Right. But it is a viable avenue of research on pecan trees, just not within the breeding program. So a lot of our diversity collections, trees you know of in the wilds, it's valuable traits that we can work with.
Okay. I think I'm going to have to hit a sawmill then to figure out how to work with the stuff.
I think that would be the best plan.
Okay. Now the sawmill we're going to is Berdoll Sawmill, right outside of Bastrop and Cedar Creek, Texas. We've been there before, and I'll put links down to those videos in the description. Along the way, I got to pass a lot of pecans in both the plantation style, and then just growing in fields. And where I most commonly find them is along riverbanks, because once again, the tree just loves water. Now, Berdoll Sawmill, I enjoy going to because of the wide selection of woods they had. Also the fact that having worked with Brandon before, I know the amount of effort he puts out there towards sharing the knowledge he has gained over all these years working in the industry in both academia and to the general public. So he's one of the most respected people in the industry that I know of. So I really do thank him for this effort. But I really do have one big question for him. So what is pecan?
So pecan is a hardwood tree that grows in our area, and it produces really good lumber. It is difficult to cut. Your sawmill has to be tuned up properly. The blades have to be sharpened correctly. The wheels have to be in line. The guide rulers have to be in line. And so you have to be on your game to cut pecan wood accurately. And then it's relatively tough wood to dry. You can't just throw it out in the sun, 100 degrees, and think it's going to dry straight. You have to cover it up, under covered buildings and dry it carefully and slow.
Okay, we've gone over that in the past. I know that you've got huge buildings that you've designed out there just to dry this stuff because, I'll attest that it cracks when it air dries all the time. It gets frustrating. I'll put links down to those videos if you're interested in that kind of stuff, but yeah, it shows skill to dry these properly.
Right. And once you do get it dry, it's a relatively tough wood to work. So your tools have to be sharpened. Your hand planes have to be sharp, your planer has to be sharp, your joiner has to be sharp. So if you can handle pecan, then that's a skill level right there that you have. And so it's kind of like Texans, it's tough. But if you treat it correctly, it makes a beautiful product. It makes beautiful floors, beautiful cabinets, all kinds of furniture.
So if you don't know what you're doing, it can bite you, but it's a way to show off that you really do know what you're doing.
Correct, absolutely. Okay. Yep. So here's a stack of pecan that we just got out of the kiln, and this is a piece of walnut. So this is walnut, pecan, and hickory, and all of these are in the same family. And you notice that the walnut is much darker in color, but the pecan and hickory are pretty similar, but there are some differences.
But they all have that really white sapwood too.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So the hickory and pecan are typically put in the same pile at the big sawmills.
I hate that.
And at the big lumber yards, they just sell it as a mix of hickory pecan.
Right.
And there are some very, very slight differences, but it's really difficult to tell the difference. A lot of times the hickory will have a lot of this whiter sapwood, where the pecan will have this darker heartwood, especially if you're cutting big diameter logs. So commercial sawmills that are sawing small diameter, fast growing trees, it's predominantly this light colored sapwood. If you're cutting big diameter pecan logs, you typically get a lot of this heartwood.
Okay.
So there's some differences between those two.
Any differences in the properties of it? Because I always hear that use a hickory handle for your axes and stuff like that, but if it's in the same family, wouldn't pecan just be just well? Is it just that they had more hickory up north where they were doing all that stuff to begin with?
Yeah, there's really not a lot. The density varies, but that depends on where the tree is growing. So there's not a real difference in the density between hickory and pecan that's noticeable. Some could be slightly harder, some could be slightly softer, but that's just the variation in trees.
Oh, okay. So where it grows does affect what you're saying, the workability of it, the hardness, softness, that kind of stuff. Where it grows, that affect anything else?
Mainly it's just the density, so if you have a tree that's growing in an area that gets lots of water, has good soil, and lots of sunlight, it's going to be fast growing, and it's going to produce a lot of sapwood. If you have a tree that is growing in bad soil, not much water, and has a lot of competition around it from sunlight, it's going to grow really slow, and it's going to have denser wood and have a lot more heartwood.
The prettier stuff.
Prettier stuff, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Let me show you some slabs that came out of some old growth trees.
Old as in found on the prairie or something?
So we talked about how trees grow faster or slower based on the conditions, and this is a 45-inch wide slab of pecan.
Okay.
Came from a tree that was probably 150 to 200 years old. So this obviously didn't grow in an orchard. So in orchards, they irrigate the trees, they fertilize them, they spray them so they grow fast and they produce a lot of sapwood. And also the trunks only get about 5 or 6 feet tall usually. You don't find these long, tall, straight trunks.
Yeah, we saw that at my grandparents' place.
Yeah. So we're not really looking for orchard grown trees. We're looking for native trees that were planted by squirrels, planted by nature, down in the river bottoms that grow big, straight, long trunks that produce really, really wide material and has lots of heartwood in it.
Okay.
So.
If it's a squirrel planting in the field, isn't it still going to be short? Do you have to find it in a pretty dense area?
If they have competition around them, the tree sprouts up, to get the sunlight. So it really depends on the condition around the tree as it was developing on how tall and straight the trunk is. So.
River's edges where a lot of trees grow.
Mm-hmm. The very best logs come from areas that have never been cleared, or haven't been cleared in 50 or 70 years because they had to get up to sunlight and that it produced a straight trunk that grew clear of knots and limbs.
How old do you think a 45-year-old tree is going to be? A couple hundred?
What we found is you can pretty much take the diameter of the tree and multiply that by 3.25.
3.25.
And you usually get really close. So if it's a really slow growing tree that's in rocky soil, not much water and not much sunlight, it can be the diameter times 4. So a 50-inch diameter tree could be about 200 years old. And if it's growing in really good soil, lots of sunlight and lots of water, it'll be about the diameter in inches times 2. So let's say a 30-inch tree could be 60 years old. But normally if you're like the 3.25, 3.4, somewhere in that range, gives you a really good guess on how old that tree is.
Okay, so this one was probably around at the start of the United States, at least when Texas started.
Yeah.
So this is the stuff that's hard to find. It's not easy to get.
Nope. Well, let me show you something that was really hard to find right over here. So these two pieces came from what was the 3rd largest pecan tree in the state of Texas. It was recorded by the Texas Forest Service. It was 7 feet in diameter, over 100 feet tall, and the tree split in half, and the half that fell over split in half. So this is just a quarter, and this is just a quarter.
This is a quarter of the way around.
Yes, sir.
Oh my. Okay. I'm noticing you must have gotten it right when it fell. I don't see too much spalting on this thing, and that's what I like about pecans is spalting.
Yeah. You want to go see some?
Yeah.
Sure, let's go. This board right here is obviously very, very light in color. So that tells me that this was sawn from a freshly cut tree. The tree was probably felled, and this board was milled probably within a week from the time the tree was down.
This is that hickory example you had. Is pecan going to be the same?
It'll be the same.
Okay.
Yep. And then you notice all of these other boards have these grays and blues and blacks and all this coloration.
Yeah, that's what
These
I like.
boards came from logs that were intentionally left to sit in the log yard to spalt, and then the lumber was sawn. So you get this much better looking color than you do with a commercially available pecan board that was cut quickly, sawn, dried quickly and out the door.
Okay, so these are from your logs. Are you telling me that you intentionally ate? I mean, I've seen those logs out there forever. Every time I pulled out, I just thought it was just inventory you hadn't gotten to yet. You're actually aging those for a certain amount of time to get the spalting.
Correct. So every single log, I look at it and I determine at what point in the future it's going to be the most valuable, and I'll put a mark on that log. So I might cut a log in 6 months or 8 months or 4 months or 2 months, where it's aged just the right time, where it'll have spalting, but it won't be too soft. So
Okay.
we're individually letting logs sit for certain periods of time.
Okay, so that takes a little bit of practice to do.
It does, yes.
Now, I have a problem though. I don't like sapwood. Call me a sapwood ageist or whatever you want,
Yep.
but the spalting I really appreciate is the stuff that's going into the heartwood. I mean, you've seen the bowls I did at the beginning of the video. I mean, that color variable, those battle lines, I really like. But all I'm seeing right here is the spalting is just in the sapwood. How do we get the spalting into the heartwood? Like I like it.
Yeah, so it will sometimes migrate over into the heartwood. It typically doesn't penetrate real deep, but sometimes it will migrate over in there and change the color of the sapwood, or sorry, of the heartwood. All right, Sean, so let's clarify what I was talking about spalting. So here are the zone lines, and they typically are in the sapwood a lot more, but you can see how this is actually gone into the heartwood. It changed the color of the heartwood. It's a little lighter in color than this over here, and also these zone lines are in the heartwood right along here.
Okay. Tell me if I'm wrong this. I've always explained zone lines as a battleground, the neutral zone in a warfare between two different funguses or the natural tree's reaction to fungus, even if it's just a cadaver. Is that true?
That's right. So in this area, there was a certain strain or type of fungus eating. There was another one over here, and when they encounter each other, they put up what they call a zone line, and they try to say, like, this is my area, just, get away from here. That's the fungus, that's their defense, their survival mechanism. So yeah, these are called zone lines, and they are where two different fungi intersected each other. So in this piece right here, you might think this is spalting, but this is just a natural variation of color in the heartwood. That's one of the really cool things about pecan. You get really light colored heartwood, you get medium colored heartwood, you get dark colored heartwood. It's kind of all over the spectrum with this species. And then when you have the spalting that we induced in the logs, the whole combination is really, really unique. All right, here's something that's really cool. So this board was sawn from a tree that was either budded or grafted. And so all right in here is a certain look, and then right there, that's the graft line or that's the bud line, and this is all different. So at some point, this tree was a baby and somebody put a graft or a bud on it.
Okay, what's What do you mean by butter graft?
So when the tree was little, about the size of your finger, if you were to take a patch, you take a 2-bladed budding knife and you cut a patch off the small tree, and you take a limb off of another tree and you cut the same patch off of that limb, and you insert that patch on that little tree. You wrap it up with tape so it doesn't dry out, and a couple weeks later you come back and you nick it with your pocket knife. And if it's green, the visibly color of green, then that tree accepted that bud. And you strip all the bark off from above that bud, off the tree, and it forces all the nutrients to come out of that little bud. So from the roots up to that bud line, it's a certain tree. It's a cross between the mother and the father tree, or the pollen. And then above that, it is an exact clone from the tree that you...
Clone?
It is. It's an exact clone from the tree that you harvested the limb.
Okay, the only purpose I could see that one might be if you like the taste of the fruit of one tree.
Yep.
And is that all it's... So this is redneck cloning before Dolly?
It goes way back to the early 1900s. And so they would pick trees that had good characteristics for nuts. So big size, easy to shell, good taste. And they would try to find those, and they would, once they found those, they would bud those onto a tree that wasn't that desirable.
Okay,
So
is that really just orchards were doing that, or is it?
it's typically orchards. Some people will go around and bud or graft trees in yards and things, but it's for commercial pecans.
The reason why I asked is this is budded, but it's pretty big for what I would think of an orchard tree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was probably harvested from a tree that was 70 to 100 years old.
Cool.
And there are a few orchards that are at that old, not many of them.
Oh, okay. You tell me if I'm wrong, but I want to kind of sum this up here
Okay.
for our viewers. Pecan, the kind of pecan we want is not readily available. You got to go out and get it. You can't get it in a plantation. So it's hard to find, hard to get back here. I know from you, because you've been working at this for 10, 20 years, it seems like, with these wildly specialized kilns out there, that it's somewhat hard to dry
It is.
and keep straight. But once you do, you get some of the wildest color hues in the same kind of family of colors that you, in just about any of the woodworking realm.
Right.
So all that effort just is a way to show off that us woodworkers know what we're doing.
Right.
Cool.
Yep.
I think I need to head home and digest that.
All right.
Okay. So that was a lot of information to digest. Luckily, I've been doing it over about a week of travel, so I got time to think about it. Will I use it all in the future? Probably not, but that's kind of the point in this kind of deep dive. You're gathering a bunch of information and refining what you'll need. I don't know when I'll be able to pull that information out to use it to my advantage, but it is now in my arsenal. But with all that, I thought it would be pertinent, since y'all been on this journey with me, y'all have learned all the same things I did, maybe a little perspective from me on what it's like to work with pecan would be in order. Now, pecan has a reputation out there of being really, really hard. In fact, its nickname is Pecancrete. But actually, I found that it's been kind of soft whenever it's green. And that's one of the properties I really like about it, is because I can rough out bowls and stuff like that. I can core bowls, meaning I could take one giant bowl bank and I could scoop out several bowls from the interior, so I'm not just turning all the inside of a giant bowl into shavings. It allows me to get a lot more money out of my effort. But the thing is, whenever it does dry really, really hard. And it earns that reputation of concrete. I would never core a fully dried log, just because, frankly, it would scare the hell out of me. You'll get nice shavings scraping green pecan. You get pure dust when you're scraping dry pecan, and you scrape whenever you're coring something. That's just the action that's happening, cutting action that's happening. So that translates into, dry square woodworking, in that, you're going to have to work it a little bit differently than something like cherry or maple, in that it is so hard. But the coloration is just wonderful. And I did learn a little bit in that the spalting that happens is generally in the sapwood, where I've always been cutting off the sapwood, so I've gotten some of the transition from sapwood to hardwood. But because I'm making bowls and I'm getting that edge the way I curve it, I get a lot of that color change. So while a fungus might change sapwood one way and hardwood to another color, it's the fact that the hardwood started out at a different color. You end up getting 4 colors from one fungus. And me rolling logs in my backyard to pick up different funguses over time allows those different colorations that I've showed you at the beginning of the video. So it's so wonderful to work for the end result you get because of the colors present in it. And I actually love the fact that it is so hard when it dries. Because as I said, I rough my work green, but letting it dry for those final finish cuts, that final finish shapings, meaning you can get such a perfect finish off the edge that the sanding isn't abrading too deep. So the finish that you put on that final surface just really is clear. It doesn't get muddled, that kind of stuff. Sometimes when you sand and then you apply oils and waxes, it's just not quite as sharp. It's kind of like looking through scratched glasses. Without that, it's just brand new pair of glasses in HD format. You see every single line. So the hardness, if you practice with your skill, whether it's with a turning gouge or a hand plane, can create a sharpness that's just not available with softer woods on that final finish cut. So to me, pecan is just a wonderful wood. And those of y'all up north, hickory might be the same thing. We just don't have as much hickory available for free down here. Walnut, different animal altogether. I know it's in the same family, but it just works differently. Now, as a final tidbit of information, if you really want to learn how a species works, it doesn't matter if you are a wood turner, if you are a machine operator, if you are a cabinet maker, if you are a box maker, whatever it is, you need to pick up the most basic of tools. A nice carving knife. This is a Sloyd knife. Not your pocket knife that has a bevel on the edge that's easy to sharpen. I mean a nice long bevel edge, and pick up the type of pecan you want to work. Now, I am a lousy spoon carver, but me just sitting here with a simple spatula that I batched out on a bandsaw, and I'm sitting here playing with it, that's all we're doing, playing. And you will get to feel how an edge interacts with the wood if you're going with the grain, against the grain, across the grain, slicing the grain, all that kind of stuff. And that is information that will translate directly into your woodworking. So, my suggestion, go pick up a piece of wood of the species you want to learn about and a knife to work with. And you will learn more than probably watching this entire video here in the real world applications of working with something like pecan. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, picked up a few bits of information, and remember, in the end, it's always worth the effort to learn, create stuff, and share it with others. Now, pardon me, while I spent a few hours out here on a lake finishing up a spatula.